I'm going to read to you the back of the book. So it says, Percy Jackson is about to be kicked out of boarding school again. Does anyone know what boarding school is? Okay, it's the type of school that you live there. Okay, so it'd be like you guys, if you went to a boarding school, you'd have school all day like you do now, but you also live at the school. So it's kind of like a college dorm in a way. Okay, so it says he's been sent to boarding school again, and that's the least of his troubles. Lately, mythological monsters and the gods of Mount Olympus seem to be walking straight out of the pages of Percy's Greek mythology textbook and into his life. And worse, he's angered a few of them. Zeus's master lightning bolt has been stolen, and Percy is the prime suspect. Now Percy and his friends have just 10 days to find and return Zeus's stolen property and bring peace to a weary Mount Olympus. But to succeed on his quest, Percy will have to do more than catch the true thief. He must come to terms with the father who abandoned him, solve the riddle of the oracle, which warns him of betrayal by a friend, and unravel a treachery more powerful than the gods themselves. Okay, so today we're going to read chapter 1, and our learning attention for today says, I am learning how to determine the point of view in a text and locate the evidence that supports it. Okay, so a big thing that we're going to be using is text evidence. Okay, and I want you guys today, while we read chapter 1, the main character is Percy Jackson. I want you to develop a point of view of him. Okay, what type of person do you think he is? Is he a good kid? Is he a bad kid? I want you to develop that point of view and think about the text evidence that supports your point of view. Okay, if you think he's bad, why is he bad? If you think he's an okay kid, why do you think he's an okay kid? Okay? So it's something I want you to think about while we are reading.
Look, I didn't want to be a half-blood. If you're reading this because you think you might be one, my advice is close this book right now. Believe whatever lie your mom or dad told you about your birth and try to lead a normal life. Being a half-blood is dangerous. It's scary. Most of the time, it gets you killed in painful, nasty ways. If you're a normal kid, reading this because you think it's fiction, great, read on. I envy you for being able to believe that none of this ever happened. But if you recognize yourself in these pages, if you feel something stirring inside, stop reading immediately. You might be one of us. And once you know that, it's only a matter of time before they sense it too. And they'll come for you. Don't say I didn't warn you.
Okay, does he say who they are? No. Okay, he doesn't say who they are yet. Obviously, they seem dangerous. Now, he says being a half-blood is dangerous and it's scary. Does he explain what a half-blood is? No. Okay, so we don't know what he's talking about. Obviously, it's something serious, though, that he is.
My name is Jackson. I'm 12 years old. Until a few months ago, I was a boarding student at the Academy, a private school for troubled kids in upstate New York. Am I a troubled kid? Yeah, you could say that. I could start at any point in my short, miserable life to prove it, but things really started going bad last May. A grade class took a field trip to Manhattan. 28 mental case kids and 2 teachers on a yellow school bus, heading to the Metropolitan Museum of Art to look at ancient Greek and Roman stuff. I know, it sounds like torture. Most Yancey field trips were. But Mr. Brunner, our Latin teacher, was leading this trip, so I had hopes. Mr. Brunner was this middle-aged guy in a motorized wheelchair. He had thinning hair and a scruffy beard and a frayed tweed jacket, which always smelled like coffee. You wouldn't think he'd be cool, but he told stories and jokes and let us play games in class. He also had this awesome collection of Roman armor and weapons, so he was the only teacher whose class didn't put me to sleep. I hoped the trip would be okay. At least, I hoped that for once I wouldn't get in trouble. Boy, was I wrong. See, bad things happen to me on field trips. Like at my 5th grade school, when we went to the Saratoga battlefield. I had this accident with a Revolutionary War cannon. I wasn't aiming for the school bus, but of course I got expelled anyway. And before that, at my 4th grade school, when we took a behind-the-scenes tour of the Marine World Shark Pool, I sort of hit the wrong lever on the catwalk and our class took an unplanned swim. And the time before that, well, you get the idea.
Okay, so the things that he's talking about, field trips that he's been on, something always seems to happen to him. Does it seem like he does it on purpose? No, I don't think he's doing it on purpose. You know, he said once, I had this accident with the Revolutionary War cannon, and then he says, you know, I sort of hit the wrong lever on the catwalk. Okay, so it's almost like he has really bad luck, or he's kind of cursed in a way. Okay, he doesn't necessarily seem bad. He's doing bad things, okay, but they're kind of like accidents.
This trip, I was determined to be good. All the way into the city, I put up with Nancy Bobofit, the freckly, red-headed kleptomaniac girl hitting my best friend Grover in the back of the head with chunks of peanut butter and ketchup sandwich. Grover was an easy target. He was scrawny. He cried when he got frustrated. He must have been held back several grades because he was the only 6th grader with acne and the start of a wispy beard on his chin. On top of all that, he was crippled. He had a note excusing him from PE for the rest of his life because he had some kind of muscular disease in his legs. He walked funny, like every step hurt him, but don't let that fool you. You should have seen him run when it was enchilada day in the cafeteria. Anyway, Nancy Bobofit was throwing wads of sandwich that stuck in his curly brown hair, and she knew I couldn't do anything back to her because I was already on probation. The headmaster had threatened me with death by in-school suspension if anything bad, embarrassing, or even mildly entertaining happened on this trip. I'm gonna kill her, I mumbled. Grover tried to calm me down. It's okay, I like peanut butter. He dodged another piece of Nancy's lunch. That's it. I started to get up, but Grover pulled me back to my seat. You're already on probation, he reminded me. You know who will get blamed if anything happens. Looking back on it, I wish I'd decked Nancy Bobofit right then and there. In-school suspension would have been nothing compared to the mess I was about to get myself into.
Okay, so they say he's on probation. Did they say what he's on probation for? No, it didn't. Okay, so if you're on probation, kind of what's that mean? Like he's on probation at school, so do what? Kind of like suspended, but it's like he's still going to school, but it's like they're really watching him, like hardcore watching him. If he does one more thing, he's gonna get kicked out of school. Okay, so he'll be expelled. Okay, so they're watching him. He's on probation. They're watching him because he's done other bad things before. Okay, now the way that he's talking about Nancy, okay, what's that tell you about him? Is he afraid of her? No, he's not afraid of her. Okay, he's willing to kind of stand his ground. Okay, but you know, with him being on probation, how's Grover sound? Grover sounds like he's what? Okay, you could say crybaby. I would say he seems like he's a little bit more, he thinks of the consequences more. Okay, like he knows that if he kind of fights back, something bad's going to happen. Okay, and Nancy Bobofit is Percy's what? Enemy, good. Okay, it's his enemy right now. But then he says, this is nothing compared to the mess I was about to get myself into. Okay, so that line right there should give you some sort of a prediction that something really bad's going to be happening soon.
Mr. Brunner led the museum tour. He rode up front in his wheelchair, guiding us through the big, echoey galleries, past marble statues and glass cases full of really old black and orange pottery. It blew my mind that this stuff had survived for 2,000, 3,000 years. He gathered us around a 13-foot-tall stone column with a big sphinx on the top and started telling us how it was a grave marker, a stela, for a girl about our age. He told us about the carvings on the sides. I was trying to listen to what he had to say because it was kind of interesting, but everybody around me was talking, and every time I told them to shut up, the other teacher, chaperone, Mrs. Dodds, would give me the evil eye. Mrs. Dodds was this little math teacher from Georgia who always wore a black leather jacket, even though she was 50 years old. She looked mean enough to ride a Harley right into your locker. She'd come to Yancey halfway through the year when our last math teacher had a nervous breakdown. From her first day, Mrs. Dodds loved Nancy Bobofit and figured I was devil's spawn. She would point her crooked finger at me and say, "Now, honey," real sweet, and I knew I was going to get after-school detention for a month. One time, after she made me erase answers out of old math workbooks until midnight, I told Grover I didn't think Mrs. Dodds was human. He looked at me real serious and said, "You're absolutely right." Mr. Brunner kept talking about Greek funeral art. Finally, Nancy Bobofit's...
Okay, so when he says, I don't think she's human, like if a friend said that to you, you would probably think that they were what? Joking, right? But then Grover says, "You're absolutely right." Okay, it's kind of strange that he says that.
Niggered something about the naked guy and the Stila, and I turned around and said, "Will you shut up?" It came out louder than I meant it to. The whole group laughed. Mr. Brunner stopped the story. "Mr. Jackson," he said, "did you have a comment?" My face was totally red. I said, "No, sir." Mr. Brunner pointed to one of the pictures on the Stila. "Perhaps you'll tell us what this picture represents?" I looked at the carving and felt a flush of relief because I actually recognized it. "That's Kronos eating his kids, right?" "Yes," Mr. Brunner said, obviously not satisfied. "And he did this because, well," I racked my brain to remember. "Kronos was the king god and..." "God?" Mr. Brunner asked. "Titan," I corrected myself. "And he didn't trust his kids who were the gods, so, Kronos ate them, right? But his wife hid baby Zeus and gave Kronos a rock to eat instead, and later, when Zeus grew up, he tricked his dad Kronos into barfing up his brothers and sisters." "Ew," said one of the girls behind me. "And so there was this big fight between the gods and the Titans," I continued, "and the gods won." Some snickers from the group. Behind me, Nancy Bobofit mumbled to a friend, "Like we're gonna use this in real life. Like it's gonna say in our job applications, 'Please explain why Kronos ate his kids.'"
Do you guys ever wonder that when you're in class? Like, are we ever going to use this in our life? Like when a teacher's telling you something? Okay, yeah, and that's what he's feeling right now. Okay, and that's what Nancy Bobofit says. She goes, when am I ever going to use this in real life? Okay, is that going to be on my job application?
"And why, Mr. Jackson?" Brunner said. "To paraphrase Miss Bobofit's excellent question, does this matter in real life?" "Busted," Grover muttered. "Shut up," Nancy hissed, her face even brighter red than her hair. At least Nancy got packed too. Mr. Brunner was the only one who ever caught her saying anything wrong. He had radar ears. I thought about his question and shrugged. "I don't know, sir." "I see." Mr. Brunner looked disappointed. "Well, half credit, Mr. Jackson. Zeus did indeed feed Kronos a mixture of mustard and wine, which made him disgorge his other 5 children, who, of course, being immortal gods, had been living and growing up completely undigested in the Titan's stomach. The gods defeated their father, sliced him to pieces with his own scythe, and scattered his remains in Tartarus, the darkest part of the underworld. On that happy note, it's time for lunch. Mrs. Dodds, would you lead us back outside?" The class drifted off, the girls holding their stomachs, the guys pushing each other around and acting like doofuses. Grover and I were about to follow when Mr. Brunner said, "Mr. Jackson." I knew that was coming. I told Grover to keep going. Then I turned toward Mr. Brunner. Sir? Mr. Brunner had this look that wouldn't let you go.
Teachers, excuse the interruption, but if you would put your recycling out when you get a moment, Mr. Galvin and his crew will be coming around this morning for recycling. Thank you.
Okay, we're at the part where it says, you must learn the answer to my question.
Mr. Brunner told me. About the Titans? About real life and how your studies apply to it.
Okay, so it makes you wonder, why does Mr. Brunner come up to Percy and say that you need to understand why this applies to real life? Okay, it makes you think, why Percy? Why does he come up to Percy and say it?
Oh, what you learn from me, he said, is vitally important. I expect you to treat it as such. I will accept only the best from you, Percy Jackson. I wanted to get angry. This guy pushed me so hard. I mean, sure, it was kind of cool on tournament days when he dressed up in a suit of Roman armor and shouted, "Whoa!" and challenged us, sword point against chalk, to run to the board and name every Greek and Roman person who had ever lived, and their mother, and what god they worshipped. But Mr. Brunner expected me to be as good as everybody else, despite the fact that I have dyslexia, an attention deficit disorder, and I've never made above a C- in my life. No, he didn't expect me to be as good. He expected me to be better. And I just couldn't learn all those names and facts, much less spell them correctly. I mumbled something about trying harder, while Mr. Brunner took one long, sad look at the stela, like he'd been at this girl's funeral. He told me to go outside and eat my lunch. The class gathered on the front steps of the museum, where we could watch the foot traffic along Fifth Avenue. Overhead, a huge storm was brewing, with clouds blacker than I'd ever seen over the city. I figured maybe it was global warming or something, because the weather all across New York State had been weird since Christmas. We'd had massive snowstorms, flooding, wildfires from lightning strikes. I wouldn't have been surprised if this was a hurricane blowing in. Nobody else seemed to notice. Some of the guys were pelting pigeons with Lunchables crackers. Nancy Bobofit was trying to pickpocket something out of a lady's purse. And, of course, Mrs. Dodds wasn't seeing a thing. Grover and I sat on the edge of the fountain, away from the others. We felt that maybe if we did that, everybody wouldn't know we were from that school, the school for loser freaks who couldn't make it elsewhere. Detention? Grover asked. Nah, I said. Not from Brunner. I just wish he'd lay off me sometimes. I mean, I'm not a genius. Grover didn't say anything for a while. Then, when I thought he was going to give me some deep philosophical comment to make me feel better, he said, "Can I have your apple?" I didn't have much of an appetite, so I let him take it. I watched the stream of cabs going down Fifth Avenue and thought about my mom's apartment, only a little ways uptown from where we sat. I hadn't seen her since Christmas. I wanted so bad to jump in a taxi and head home. She'd hug me and be glad to see me, but she'd be disappointed too. She'd send me right back to Yancey, remind me that I had to try harder, even if this was my sixth school in 6 years, and I was probably going to be kicked out again. I wouldn't be able to stand that sad look she'd give me.
Okay, so if this was your sixth school in 6 years, how would your parents react? Would they just, he said she'd give me a hug and be glad to see me. Would your parents just give you a hug and be glad to see you if you got kicked out of 6 schools in 6 years? Probably not, okay? I highly doubt it. So it makes you wonder, why is his mom kind of babying him?
Mr. Brunner parked his wheelchair at the base of the handicap ramp. He ate celery while he read a paperback novel. A red umbrella stuck up from the back of his chair, making it look like a motorized cafe table. I was about to unwrap my sandwich when Nancy Bobofit appeared in front of me with her ugly friends. I guess she'd gotten tired of stealing from the tourists and dumped her half-eaten lunch in Grover's lap. Oops, she grinned at me with her crooked teeth. Her freckles were orange, as if somebody had spray painted her face with liquid Cheetos. I tried to stay cool. The school counselor had told me 1,000,000 times, count to 10, get control of your temper. I was so mad, my mind went blank. A wave roared in my ears. I don't remember touching her, but the next thing I knew, Nancy was sitting on her butt in the fountain, screaming, "Percy pushed me." Mrs. Dodds materialized next to us. Some of the kids were whispering, "Did you see? The water. Like it grabbed her." I didn't know what they were talking about. All I knew was that I was in trouble again.
Okay, so right here it says, I don't remember touching her, but next thing I knew, Nancy was sitting on her butt in the fountain. Don't you think he'd remember pushing someone into a fountain? Probably, right? I mean, if you shove somebody, you usually remember it. But then he says, Mrs. Dodds materialized next to him, and some of the kids were whispering, "Did you see the water? It grabbed her." So obviously, did Percy really push her? Doesn't sound like it. It sounds like the water somehow grabbed her and pulled her in. Okay, what we're going to do, we're going to stop there for the moment. Okay, and I want you to answer the questions, and then we're going to talk about them, okay?